Our second to last story pertains to one of my favorite topics, which is crapping on FrSky receiver firmware incompatibility issues. And a main reason I do that is that I spend a lot of my day helping people deal with those issues. And eventually I got tired of it. Not helping people, feel free to email me and I'll try to help you with your problems. Just tired of FrSky making these decisions. There's how many different variants are there, Blenty?
The main variants, well, I guess there's technically, there's ACCST 1 and 2, and then there's EU for both of those firmware. So I think
EU
there's
versus FCC.
Yeah, I think there's 4 main like ACCST firmwares that are like the big concern for people, because you could be on any of those, right?
And you've got D8 versus D16 as well.
Sure. Yeah, D8 should work. I believe D8 will bind regardless of your ACCST version.
That is true. But you've got those 4 versions. You've got your region, which is EU versus FCC, and you've got your version, which is V1 versus V2. And part of the problem is that FrSky is currently shipping receivers with different firmwares. So the XM Plus is shipping with firmware 2.1, but the RXSR is still shipping with firmware 1.9, and which means there is no single firmware version that you can have on your radio that is guaranteed to work with all sold receivers without having to flash the receiver to update the firmware, which is a pain in the ass. So Aloft Hobbies, people may not know who they are. They're not one of the bigger stores, but they are an FPV store, and they've released a universal ACCST firmware.
Yeah, I believe Aloft is the official US service dealer.
Correct.
For FrSky.
So when you send a FrSky radio in for repair, you would send it to Aloft and they would fix it and send it back to you.
Yeah. So they decided, hey, let's just try to work on this and fix this. So that's what they've done. They've been beta testing this for a while, and they have built a version of the firmware that, regardless of what is on your TX, whether you have EU or FCC, V1 or V2, if you have this firmware on your receivers, you'll be able to flash. You'll be able to bind regardless.
Yeah, because what you just said, Blenty, flash. There's a catch, isn't there?
Yeah.
You can't just flash this to your FrSky receivers and then forget about the version problems. It is only available on a receiver made and sold by Aloft Hobbies.
Yes. They said that they're also going to offer a plan where you can mail in your receivers. So you desolder 8 quads worth of receivers, you ship them for $10 or $15.
Oh, that's interesting.
And they'll flash them all for you for whatever fee, and then send them back. But unfortunately, this is currently only the X8R for receivers. So I think this is more aimed at plane style receivers.
Wait, I didn't know that. It's only the X8R?
Yeah, they're getting very close to the official release for the first firmware, which is the X8R. Yeah.
That's way less interesting than I thought the story was going to be. I wish I'd have known that.
Brandon, my understanding is because they're fixing it because Aloft is the dealer, and so they're like, hey, we're tired of dealing with this, and they got up with FrSky, and they're like, well, let's do this. So any dealer will be able to get this. So there's 4 major dealers across the world, from what I'm hearing. There's 3 in different regions, and there's one in the US, which is Aloft. So they'll all be able to flash this and burn it into the receiver. Apparently, there is some kind of bootloader burn-in process, because they were saying once you get this, then you could switch back and forth between old and new firmware receivers, and you can also flash updates from them. But you cannot do this unless you have this burn-in happening. And they said they don't want to release it because of all the clone receivers, and if they released it, the clones would have it as well, and then that wouldn't benefit FrSky. And because they're a FrSky dealer, I think they have to look out for that. So.
Right, they have to look out. So they're kind of trying to help mitigate the problem, but they're not going to bite the hand that feeds them, and that's fair.
I got to be honest with you. To me, looking at everything that I'm seeing here from what they're doing, it seems cool, but it really seems like a solution to alleviate headaches by dealers, right? Because if you cared about the user experience, you would just provide the firmware.
Right, absolutely. I mean, they paid money to develop it, and it sounds like they want to recoup some of that money or make a profit. I don't know how much. A lot of times people overestimate the amount of profit that's in a project like this. It's more hassle than it's worth. But They certainly are looking out for their own interests first and their customers second. That's not necessarily a bad thing. But Ghost Branch FPV in the Discord points out, wouldn't it be nice if there was a firmware you could put on your radio that would bind to both V1 and V2? Oh, there is. It's the multi-protocol module from Pascalanger that comes in the Radio Master and many other radios. Could bind to both. So it's really only FrSky radios and FrSky customers who will benefit from this the most.
Yeah, and I would guess the reason they're not going to do a TX is because they're expecting it's easy to sell you new receivers. It's not as easy to sell you a new radio.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. All right. Well, good guy Aloft Hobbies. Nevertheless, although there are still some caveats, the real fix is to stop buying FrSky receivers and go to ExpressLRS. Or, and you say, well, the main downside of ExpressLRS is, despite the best efforts of the devs, it's still a little more complicated to flash than some other things, but not FrSky. It's easier to flash than FrSky.